Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Valerie Clay, and I'm here to present a final research project this evening, the two churches at Timber Ridge. Before we begin, I would like to state that according to our course guidelines, historians must be honest and objective in their investigations, and I hope to do justice to that this evening. Tonight, we're going to look at two churches, one mission. Both churches are Presbyterian churches. The one on the left is the Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church, also known as Old Stone. And on the right, you have the brick church known as Timber Ridge Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church, or the ARP Church. Both have one mission, and that is to minister to the Presbyterians in the area. Timber Ridge is an area right out in Virginia. It's in the lower Shenandoah Valley. It's located about 7 miles north of Lexington, Virginia, and is located right along what was known as the Great Wagon Road. In the 1730s, the Scotch-Irish and German settlements start coming into the area. The settlers begin to fill the area by the 1750s, and the Great Wagon Road brought these settlers from Pennsylvania. That starts from Philadelphia, goes through Lancaster, York, as you can see on the screen, travels through Maryland south into the Shenandoah Valley, through Harrisonburg, Stanton, and then eventually to Lexington and points south. The Timber Ridge churches are located just north of Lexington. Timber Ridge was the first area settled in what is now known as Rockbridge County. And the settlements did start in the 1730s. The vast majority of settlers were Scotch-Irish. There were quite a few Germans as well, but the vast majority were Presbyterian Scotch-Irish that settled the area. If you look to the map that's over on your right again, zooms in a little bit more on the Wagon Road, and you see Lexington there, and just north of Lexington you see a dot that represents where Timber Ridge Presbyterian churches are located. The picture that you see over on the right is a artist's rendering of what we believe the original log structure would have looked like. So Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church was founded in 1746. People had been coming into the area for years prior to that. However, this was the first established church. It was established as a new side or a new light organization, but I want to make sure you understand that does not mean there were not old light or old side Presbyterians in the area. They certainly were. It's just the majority of the people appeared to be new light, new side, and the first minister was of that faith. William Robinson had been through the Shenandoah Valley in the year prior to the creation of the church and ministered to people, and Dr. Archibald Alexander, famous Presbyterian theologian, actually was born in Rockbridge County, member of Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church, famously said that William Robinson converted, quote, as many souls as any minister who ever lived. So it's no surprise that the year after he comes through the valley that a church is established in Timber Ridge. The church, of course, grows out of its log structure. The Reverend John Brown is called to Timber Ridge in 1753, and it's this time that you start to see more old side versus new side. Again, the church was created much more in the new side of the much more liberal side of Presbyterianism, but that does not mean that there were not people who were very much old side. Just because people were new to the area, that doesn't mean that they were the only people. New settlers were coming in all the time, bringing in their various beliefs, especially the Scotch-Irish in the area. In 1756, 3 years after John Brown comes, the church grows out of its log cabin, and they set up a more permanent structure, which is the stone church. The artist rendering you see there on the right is what we believe the original structure looked like. It is the current church actually sits on the same area as the stone church you see represented here. And there are parts of the original 1756 church that you can see in the church today. I would like to note that women were very much a part of the construction. They helped to bring up the stones, stones, as well as the sand that was used for the mortar. There was a mill creek just down the hill from the church, and that's where the women set up shop. And they gathered the stones, they gathered the sand, bagged it up, and then that allowed the workers to put the church together actually pretty quickly. The land that the church currently sits on, or sitting on at the time, was donated by a man with the name of Robert Houston. And if the last name Houston sounds familiar, you're on the right track. Robert Houston was the father of Samuel Houston. Samuel Houston, father of Texas. Yes, Sam Houston was born in Rockbridge County. He was baptized in Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church, and you can actually see the land where he was, where he's born. There, in the picture that just came up on your right, he was not born in that house. That house was built later by another minister, but that is the land in which Sam Houston was born, in a little log structure. Many think a little bit behind where the current house stands. There are many founding families of Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church. The grave marker that you see there is actually of one of the founding families. The family is still very much present in the Timber Ridge area, the Mackeys, and that is the grave of John Mackey, considered a forefather of Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church. He passed away in 1773, and if you look on the screen, you can see exactly what is inscribed on his tombstone. I did keep the 18th century spellings. That is exactly how it is etched on his headstone. If you notice, it looks a little catty corner. Well, that's actually because his grave is directly facing east. Some of the graves in the old churchyard appear to be kind of diagonal. Well, that's because they are directly facing east, which was the practice, and still to some degree is, to the east being, headed towards Jerusalem. Now, we discussed old lights and new lights. That's still an issue at Timber Ridge, unfortunately, and there was a bit of sectarianism. The old side versus the new side was still very much a part of Timber Ridge. The old side, or the Seceder or the Covenanters, continued to meet in the old log structure. The log structure, even though it had been abandoned, was still there, and so the old siders, there were enough of them they felt as though they needed to, go and have services on their own. In 1767, the Reverend John Brown left Timber Ridge. It's important to note that up until this time, John Brown, we believe through records, that he ministered to both old and new side Presbyterians. He was very much a peacemaker, and things were very peaceful during the time that he was at Timber Ridge. Timber Ridge did not want him to leave. He actually petitioned the presbytery to leave, and was granted that. He had been ministering to two different churches, New Providence as well as Timber Ridge, and he felt only minister to one. Timber Ridge hated to see him go, and unfortunately, with his departure, you start to see the split between new and old side widen. The Reverend William Graham arrives as the new minister, and he is a fervent New Side Presbyterian, very, very much educated in the ways of the New Side or the New Light Presbyterian way. So much so that the Seceders actually move out of the log structure that was the original church, and they create their own log structure about a mile away from Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church. It was called the Old Tent, and local historians believe it was called the Old Tent because they believed in the old tenets. They were very much the Covenanters of the old side. And so instead of saying old tenant, the locals called it the old tent. Now, one of the big issues at Timber Ridge was the issue of psalmody. You'll see there on your right, that's a picture of Reverend William Graham. Graham was very, as I said before, very much a New Light Presbyterian. Timber Ridge, as he was the minister there, saw an increase in the use of Isaac Watts hymns, and this is directly correlated to his ministry at Timber Ridge. However, the old side, seceders and Covenanters, deplored hymns. They were very much focused on the Psalms. They felt as though the Psalms were divinely ordained. And so when an individual like Isaac Watts goes in and somewhat in their mind changes the wording or interprets it differently in order to put it to music, that was a big no for them. They did not agree with that at all. But William Graham was a firm supporter of hymns, and in the past, Reverend Brown had been very supportive of both sides. He was, I said, a peacemaker, but Graham very much focused on the new side of Presbyterianism, and this did not sit well with many of the old side or seceders. So the old Associate Reformed Church grows. The old tent, as it was called, continues to grow. And finally, in 1831, a man by the name of Horatio Thompson is called to minister. He was young, fresh out of divinity school, and absolutely a firecracker by all accounts. He very quickly realizes that the old log structure that his church is contained in is not enough. It's not enough for them. And so he is able to hash out an agreement between the Stone Church and the Associate Reformed Church. And they decide that they will share the church every other Sunday. This works out beautifully. Not only do they share the church every other Sunday, but they also take turns taking care of the church, cleaning the church. It actually works out very well for both sides. A contemporary observer actually said that really everyone on Timber Ridge was a Presbyterian. They didn't see themselves as seceder or this person was New Light or that. That didn't really matter to them. They just saw themselves as Presbyterians. Oftentimes people would one Sunday attend a service with Reverend Thompson, and then the next Sunday attend service with the assembly minister. So they just saw themselves as Presbyterians. Unfortunately, there is division once again. In August of 1854, a peculiar thing happened. So the Associate Reformed congregation showed up at the Timber Ridge Old Stone Church for services, and they realized that the doors were locked. Were the doors locked on purpose? Well, that's the great question. Some say that they were, some say that they were not. The Associate Reformed congregation felt that they had been locked on purpose. A teenager by the name of Maggie Gibson, known as the window opener to locals and local historians, she threw open one of the windows to the church, crawled through, went and unlocked the door. She was known as an independent and spirited young lady, very Scot-Irish in her ancestry. Her family lovingly called her the boss. So she was a headstrong young lady, and when she set her mind to something, she did it, and that's exactly what happened that day. Of course, once word gets out what Maggie's done, tongues start wagging in the area, and there becomes a huge discussion on should they have done that? Whose church is it? Unfortunately, the discussion drags on and court battles ensue. The Associate Reformed Church feels it is their church. The Assembly Presbyterians say that it is their church, and there becomes a discussion on whose church is it. They both shared the church, and they both have taken care of the church. They've maintained it. So whose church is it? Over the years, the battle waged on who exactly owned the Stone Church. And one of the lawyers that was involved at the time stated in Kinnear, there's an essay by Mr. Kinnear who states everyone on the ridge was, quote, Presbyterian that he had found, and that each Presbyterian, they were either Associate Presbyterian, Associate Reformed Presbyterian, General Assembly Presbyterian, Good Presbyterians, Bad Presbyterians, and just plain Presbyterians. So even though there's court battles ensuing, even the lawyers are saying there are just a lot of Presbyterians here at Timber Ridge, and it seems as though for whatever reason, they just cannot get along at this point. Eventually, the courts side with the Assembly Presbyterians, and so the ARP Presbyterians decide to build their own church. Horatio Thompson, the minister at the time, donates the land to build the Associate Reformed Church. That land is directly across the road from where the current Stone Church was at. So Horatio Thompson, puts up this church. It's built in about a year, which was very quick considering it was built in it was finished in 1856. The court decision came down in late 1854. Construction started in 1855, and it was finished in 1856. Timber Ridge today, once that second church was built, it was almost as though things went right back to the way they had always been. The picture that you see at the top is of Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church, excuse me, ARP Church, as you would see it standing directly in front of the Stone Church. They literally are right across from one another. But it's important to note both churches, even today, have vital, engaging congregations. They are still a part of Timber Ridge. They just see themselves as Presbyterians, just as the lawyer said in Mr. Kinnear's essay. Also, they continue today to hold joint celebration services. So they'll have joint Thanksgiving services, Christmas services, Easter services. They share a very large cemetery. Really, anybody who lives in the area, that is the cemetery where they are buried. There is the cemetery at the Old Stone Church, but it is actually very small, and they entered into an agreement with the ARP Church, and that is where both congregation members are buried even today. Families cross the road to worship together, just like they did even 200 years ago. One family will be in one church one Sunday, and then they'll be in the other church the next Sunday. That is not unusual. Today, those churches really, I believe, serve as an example of how we as a society can have differing opinions, yet still focus and get along together. They do things a little differently, but in the end, they're still Presbyterians. They get along with one another. The focus is on coming together as a community and worshiping the Lord. And really, as a society, I feel as though that's what we should probably do as humans. We're all humans. And yes, we have differing opinions and we go about things differently. But at the end of the day, we're humans and we just need to take care of one another. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thanks.